Hello there. What we're going to do today is we're going to see if we can code with ChatGPT as a product manager. So what I want to be able to do is pass user stories and have it be able to write the code of my user stories and those requirements. So I'm testing out this nice long prompt to set things up. I won't read it to you now because it's pretty long, but basically the gist of it is it says you're a software engineer, you're able to write code, you write unit tests for your code with covering all the edge cases. I'm a project manager. I'm going to give you user stories. You're going to clarify those user stories and then write code for those user stories, and I'm going to run the test. Okay, so one of the things that I didn't read to you was that I asked it to set up a Docker environment for me. So you can see it created a Docker file. One of the things I don't like is that it created a command already, so it's basically going to run the unit test as soon as I run this Docker container. I don't want that because that's just going to rebuild the Docker container every time. So I'm going to fix that and then okay, so we're going to get into the fun stuff here. I'm going to provide it with its a description of the project and then its first user story. So here it tells it we're creating a script that can take a long audio file and split it into the individual songs that are inside that audio. I give it its first user story. As an audio split user, I should be able to provide a path to a long audio file as input via the command line. Having provided a path as a command line parameter, I should see the name of the path printed out in my, let's see. So then ChatGPT says, understood, confirm the reasons. Are there any specific constraints on the or validity of the file path? Should the script handle any error? Let's just go ahead and say yes, confirm that the file exists and is a valid audio file. If not, print either input file not found or invalid input format. Okay, so it's getting everything set up here. One thing you'll notice, again, it didn't follow my directive not to write code that was in the command. I find this happens a lot with ChatGPT. It will still just write code even though you've told it not. So let's copy the code to the first file, put it into our app. We'll name it audiosplit.py. And then over here, we will come down and copy the tests. Copy test. Let's just name it the same name though. I'm assuming that's probably what we should. Test audio split.py. And we'll paste in the code for the to run. And then let's go see if that works. So we'll come over here to the command line. And we will say, all right, let's run the tests. And looks like the test. So you can see here it wrote tests for the file not being there, the input being invalid. So there you have it. And I guess actually run the script. So let's drop some data into our Docker container. I have this. Okay, so now that we have that file mounted into our system, let's check out what happens if I provide the path to that file. Okay, so you see, it just gives me out the input file. If I give it like some other, let's see, I think it'll just probably just input file not found. So now we can also test just a bad file in. Let's touch one, and then we'll run the command and look, invalid file format. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next user story. This one tells ChatGPT, I should be able to pass a optional parameter called silence threshold, which specifies the threshold below which is considered silence. If not provided, the default value should be -50. When running the audio script, I should see the silence threshold setting printed in my terminal. Okay, so it didn't seem to have any questions about that. And it says here's your updated code and the corresponding unit test. So it gave me the entire code and the entire test suite again. So we're going to copy that new code, paste it back into our code editor. Then we will copy the new test, paste those in, and then we can come back over here and run our tests. And you can see that it tested file not found, tested invalid file, test invalid file format, test invalid silence threshold, so that's a new one. Test valid audio with custom threshold, test valid audio file with default threshold. So it wrote all the tests for us, and then we can run the script just for fun with the silence threshold, and we see it, and we can see it if we take it away, it's -50. One thing I don't like about this is that it's not a named parameter, which means I have to remember the order of the parameters going in. So let's ask ChatGPT to fix that. Okay, and it's going to write out the script, but you can see that it's changing it now. Okay, so you can see it updated the test as well, but if I come here and I run the test, we actually get a failure. So it seems to have not wrote the code correctly with this new change in silence threshold. So what we can do is we can just grab this and tell it, this is what I got. One of the tests is now failing, and give it the error. So it looks like it's just saying that the argparse system wasn't done correctly, so we're rewriting the test. And then we can come over here and run the test again. and boom. Okay, now we can move on to our next user story, which states that I should be able to pass a minimum silence duration, optional named parameter this time, which specifies the minimum duration in milliseconds a span of silence must be in order for it to be considered a break between songs. The default value should be 1000. So simple enough, pretty much similar to the last test. Notice here, I forgot to say that I should see the output, but it learned from the other ones that it should print the minimum silence. So for better or for worse, it did the right thing this time. So we will update our code and update our tests and run our tests. And we can see here, there's a new test for minimum silence duration, and make sure it's in the output. And we see the minimum silence duration. And when we provide it, there we go. And then we'll do the same thing for chunk size, which is the size of the audio file, the seconds, the number of seconds in the audio file in milliseconds that it's going to analyze at a time in order to find silence. We'll get our updated code. We will copy our code. And then we will run our tests. And you see we now have a test for chunk size. And for funsies, you see chunk size coming out. And when configured. And there we go. Okay, we're going to move on to our next user story here. But one thing I did want to point out is notice I'd used a copy and paste. And I accidentally put the wrong parameter down here. But it actually made the code correctly. So it knew what I was trying to do. So add another user story. We want to be able to specify the output format, whether it WAV, MP3, or OGG. And run our tests. And we can see there's new tests here. And then we can run our script again, output format WAV. And if we specify the output format. So now we want to get super meaty and see if it can figure out how to write the code. Just giving it the vague story. As an audio split user, given I have provided a path to a long audio file and may have provided optional parameters, I should see a report printed in the terminal that tells me the beginning, end, and duration of each song in the file. I should see the beginning, end, and duration in hour, minute, second format. Honestly, this is the first time I've ever tried giving a user story that's asking it to have this much understanding of what we're doing. It may not work. We're going to take a little bit of time to read its response. Let's extend audio split script to include functionality for analyzing the audio file, identifying songs based on silence, and printing the report of beginning and end duration in the song. To achieve this, we'll use a library like PyDub to process the audio file and detect silence. We'll then generate the required report and print it in the terminal. That's pretty awesome. It actually understands what I've been hinting at the whole time. So it's going to give me this requirement. We need to add it here to my requirements file. Normally you would have to rebuild the system, but since I'm inside, what I'm going to do instead is pip install, and that should take care of it for us. Alrighty, so let's go over and now copy our code. Now we will see running our tests what they add. And we see we have an error. So let's feed this error back to ChatGPT. So I can already tell you what's going to happen here. And maybe I skipped it. So let's go see if it told me first, and then we'll see if I skipped it. Okay, looking at this, I do see that it says you'll need to install PyDub and FFmpeg to handle this audio processing. So they tell me to add PyDub, but it doesn't seem that they tell me to add FFmpeg. So let's just let it know. I think what we'll do is we'll probably just give it back the error and let it figure it out. Let's see. Okay, so let's look at what it came up with. The error indicates that audio segment class from PyDub library is not defined in the test script. Additionally, there is a warning about FFmpeg not being found, which is required by PyDub for audio processing. Right, so now it's figured out I need to update Docker Compose, your Docker file. So let's do that. Okay, so instead of tearing down and rebooting my system, I instead ran the command that it gave me to add to my Docker file, and that installed FFmpeg for me. Now we'll come back over and make sure we still have the right test file. Copy. And then we will run our tests. And we still get an error. So let's see what it says. So what it's telling me here is that there's a problem with the sort of like test audio file, and it's going to see if it can figure out how to create the test audio file correctly. We'll copy, paste, run the test again, and we still get an error. So what I told it is, it seems we might be stuck on this. It can't seem to figure out how to mock the file. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just create a MP3 file and then give it to it and see if that works. Okay, so actually I thought I was going to create a file for it, but it seems to believe it can create an MP3 file in the test to use. So let's try that. So it actually worked. Okay, so I'm going to run it for real to see what the output actually looks like. And we can see that we have an output. Song 1 starts at 0, ends at 34. Song 2 starts at 34, ends at 54. Bam. And let's go see if that's correct. So I actually have this file loaded up here. So it says song 1 ends around 34 seconds. And that looks correct to me. And song 2 ends at 54 seconds. Song 2 ends at 54 seconds. Yep. And then song 3 ends at 110. So I'm not sure I'm buying that's, so we may have to fiddle with some things here. So what we want to do is try to debug that by asking ChatGPT what it thinks. Now, it's kind of important to think about why we might be having a problem. Is the actual reading of the file and detecting the silence point wrong, or is my output wrong? It's just telling me the wrong place. Because I suspect that reading the file is actually not the problem, right? Because this is a library that's supposed to be able to find silence in the track. Another thing that was a hint that the inaccuracy was not the result of reading the file was that there was drift along the file, right? Where the one song was good, the next song was okay. Eventually it got wrong, which is strange. That suggests that there might be another problem. So we want to go, I have run the script on a real audio files and it loses accuracy after a few songs. How can I figure out if the inaccuracy is the result of errors detecting silence or math errors when printing the result? We went back and forth a little bit because I wasn't sure it was understanding my thing. So what it suggested essentially was to all update the script to print out some logging for you. We can see, we can run the script here. As you can see, it's writing some of the debugging. But what it didn't mention was that, hey, I'm actually going to create the files and you can take a look at it. And if we go and look at file number 3, which was that problematic file, we can actually see that the track is 15 seconds, about 15 seconds long, which is the correct size. If you look here, you have from around 1 minute to around 1 minute and 15 seconds. And I've listened to this file and it is the correct file. So as we can see, it turns out the problem was actually in the math. And if you start to think about it, you can see what it did. It just determined, and this is common, you have to be smarter than a computer sometimes. What it did was it split up the file and then calculated the length of each file and then told me that's where the start and end points, forgetting that there's these silence spots in here. And that's what caused the drift. Okay, so what should we tell ChatGPT? This is what I'm going to tell it. I have evaluated each chunk and determined that the chunks are in fact the correct size. This suggests that there is a calculation error when printing the output. I believe I have figured it out. You let me know what you think as well. You are splitting the file into chunks based on silence. Those new chunks no longer have silence at their ends, so the start and end point of each track in the original file can no longer be determined. This explains the drift that occurs in the amount of inaccuracy of the output. Before we write any more code, tell me what are some options for addressing this problem. So it basically responds that I'm right, and it's realized that it's erred in its ways, and it proposed some solutions. One is to include the silence in the chunks. I actually don't mind that solution as well, because I like a little bit of silence on either end of my tracks, but that's just me personally. Then there's another one, track the silence intervals separately, which basically is going to calculate the silence first, so it can just tell me later when the start and ends are, which is also a good solution. Post-process the chunks. After splitting the audio into chunks, we can analyze the chunks to identify the exact points where the silence begin. This doesn't seem to be a good solution to me. It seems to suggest that option number 2 is the best one, track them separately. We might as well just go with that. Let's try it. But again, it didn't follow my instruction of not printing the code, and it gave me the new code. So we'll copy the code. And let's try running the code again. It says here the first one ends at around 36 seconds. So let's go check that out. That looks right to me. Then it says the next track starts at 37 and ends at 57. Let's check that out. So starting point, somewhere around 37, ending point, 57. Perfect. And then the next one starts at 59 and ends at 114. So let's see, it starts at 59, ends at 114. Yeah, so we're good there. And then the last one starts at 116 and ends at 154. And that looks about right, 154-ish. There we go. Actually, their solution worked, and that one was a good one. Okay, so now that we're happy with the output, let's go ahead and update some of the code and make sure we get new tests. I'm going to send this in while it prints out. I'll read it. Basic, it says I have the script running. And I want to keep those chunk songs outputs because, of course, that was eventually going to be my goal anyway, was to get the individual songs out of the long audio track. But what I did is provided a user story again as an audio split user, given I have a script, run the script with an input file and may have provided parameters. I should see one audio file per song found in the input audio file. I should see each audio file has the same name as the input file with the chunk number appended. I should see tracks with a chunk number 1 digit have a 0 prepended to their chunk number. Examples: input audio.wave, chunk 1 audio.01.wave, up to chunk 10 would be audio 10.wave. And then I asked it to please update the tests to be able to support the new printed output. I also asked it to remove the debugging. So that's what it's talking about here. So here it's printing out the code. Looks like it's already done. And we have our new unit tests. We'll see how much it was able to actually do that. Okay, so let's update the code and run our tests. And you see we get an error here, and it's related to the fact that it's expecting to see the file path in the output. And this really demonstrates the importance of writing the test, because you might forget something. This is maybe not that important in this case, but ChatGPT might forget something later down the road and write some code that breaks your original functionality, and you wouldn't know without the test. So let's go ahead and let it know that that error has now occurred. And as you can see, it's like, oh, whoops, I accidentally cleaned that up. With our code updated, we run the test again. And even worse. And just think of how long it would take you to actually debug all these errors. Okay, so let's copy the new tests. Paste them in. Run them again. Okay. So this is sometimes you can end up in these kind of things with ChatGPT as well, where it just like suddenly loses its mind and starts doing dumb shit. So it appears that whatever it did made it so the tests don't run at all. We'll let ChatGPT know. So we update it again, run the test again. I'm not sure what it did to lose the test. Okay, so we still have an error. So we could end up in some sort of loop here where it just isn't able to create the test thing. We might have to think for it. So I want to walk through some important things that have happened. As we saw just now, we're not getting the output. The tests are failing. We need to figure out why. This is one of the areas coding with ChatGPT you actually likely will need to step in, or you can end up in these loops with ChatGPT where it just keeps trying to update the code and try to figure out the problem. And it doesn't have the ability to step back and think about what could be the problem. So you can see here, it first says the failure indicates that the output files are not being created as expected. Let's add some debug information to understand why the files are not being generated. Now, look what it's trying to do. It's trying to update the original script and put in debug information. Our problem isn't with the code. The code is perfectly capable of creating an audio file that we need. The problem was in the tests, and it's unable to create the audio file and split the audio file within the tests, right? But it wants to update the code, and that's problematic, right? Because we don't want to do that, because obviously once we start putting debug statements in our code, we're going to start breaking other tests. I mentioned that to this, and I said, before I run this, are we sure that debugging won't break other tests? And it's like, okay, you're right. I guess now let's put in flags. So now we're really going down in the wrong direction, right? But what it's not even realizing, the code isn't broken. The test is broken. So here I try to straighten it out. The problem I'm seeing with your approach is that the issue with creating the audio file only occurs in the test. So debugging the live code doesn't seem like a good approach. It says, okay, given the issue creating an audio file only occurs in test, we should focus on debugging specifically within the test environment. Here are some strategies to debug the code. Checks the existence of the file before execution, print the detailed, right? So it's going to start trying to debug its tests. And then it says here, we will only add debugging to the test to ensure that the issue is identified without affecting the script. Okay, good. So at least now we're focusing on the script. Here's the output. It had all this debugging stuff. Okay, there was an error where it rewrote the bad code. It gave me some new code. You can see the problem here, right? You can end up in these loops. It's losing the narrative again here and trying to update the actual code. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to fix the tests. So I tell it, you need to follow along. So it goes back to updating the tests. So now here's what it's telling me. Okay, I'm giving you an input file. It should create these two output files. Let's test to see whether we do. I said, nope, we're getting the same error. It says the output indicates that the script doesn't generate the expected output files. Since the script works correctly outside of the test, there may be a difference. So now it's again going down rabbit holes, right? Now it's like, oh, well, you probably have file permissions, or there's an environmental difference or something like that. It's like, hold on a second, right? But this is the problem we have, right? So look, it wants to check all these things. It hasn't yet figured out how to step back and realize, is it presenting the problem to the code correctly? And here I was telling it, you need to follow my directives better. I specifically stated you should not produce code. We need to solve the problem, right? So I'm still working out like it's very anxious to write code all the time. And obviously that takes time and all that, and it's wasteful. So what I'm trying to get it to do is discuss the problem with me first, and then we can write the code. So it says here's the officer script runs, but does not generate the files. Now it's still talking about permissions, environmental differences. It's the equivalent of unplug your computer and plug it back in, or check your network connection, right? That kind of message. So it says this. I said, why do you think the files might not be created, other than the reasons you have specified? Could it be that you're creating an invalid audio file to process and therefore cannot get output audio files? Oh, here we go. That's a valid point. If the audio input is used in the test is somehow invalid or corrupted, it could prevent the script from processing and generating. So what it's going to start doing now is add debugging to make sure, hey, is FFmpeg set up correctly? Do we have a correct file? It's starting to think about it. So I say, okay, so how should we begin? What's the first test we should run? Should we test one thing at a time? Remember, I don't want us changing code, only tests. Now it's starting to focus. Let's begin by verifying the validity of the input audio file in the test. We can proceed step by step to ensure each aspect is working. Gives me some code, run the test. And I'm like, wait. How do you know the audio file you're creating is valid? It goes through it. Here's how we can ensure. So basically it just gave me back the same thing. So it's not yet thinking about it, but I'm also not communicating very well that like, do you expect your input file to actually produce something? So here I am trying to focus it now because it's still writing code when I don't want it to, right? I just need to, so I'm trying from now on, when I ask questions, only answer the question. I have not updated the code in your last response. I'm still at the code 2 responses ago. It's really important that you follow this instruction. It's how we stay in sync. So let's see if that works. So it's like, could there be an issue with the audio file that's being created, causing the script not to produce audio? But yes, it's possible that the audio file created during the setup test audio.mp3 is invalid, leading to a script not producing output files. Verifying the validity of this file is crucial. You can proceed to validate the created audio file and ensure it's valid. So we run the test, and I believe, you can see here, you get a lot of FFmpeg output, write permissions. Yeah, we have write permissions, checking the existence. But then here, checking existence before running, which should be false, checking the existence after running. Notice it still didn't test the audio file that it's saying it's going to do, but that's okay. So it still failed, wasn't able to create these 2 files. So now it says script runs without errors. The input file test audio exists. FFmpeg was available. Script write permissions in the current directory. No output files generated. The issue might be with how the script processes the input file. Use a known good audio file with clear silence and sound segments. So now, even though it's telling me, hey, I need an audio file that has silence and sound, it hasn't figured out yet how to create that's the file it needs to create, right? Blah, 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 it gives me code again, which of course I've asked it not to do. So I reminded it of that. I still suspect the problem is with the input test audio, and FFmpeg is exiting without an error, but not creating files because of the input file. Can you not clean up the created file so I can inspect it and run it against the real code? So it does yes. So in the teardown, it removes out deleting the file. Okay, so here I've ran the code and I'm telling it, let's discuss. Do not provide me code. So I'm really still trying to get it to stop writing code. I have inspected the audio file you created in the test. It only has silence. What would you expect the output to be if you fed FFmpeg a silent file? If you feed FFmpeg a silent file, audio file, it's likely that no output files are created when running, right? Of course, no sound to split, silence detection, blah, 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 no chunks created. So now it's, okay, next steps. Let's create a valid audio. Ensure that test audio file contains both silence and sound. Continue to discuss, don't write me code. Are you capable of creating an audio file that has sound and silence that can be used in the test? Yes, it is. It comes up with a plan. I don't like it. So I just say, okay, how about 1 second of silence, 2 seconds of tone, 1 second of silence, 2 seconds of tone, 1 second of silence is better test. Let's match this reality. Let's do that. Okay, now let's write the test. And that's where we are. So copy the code. Okay, and you can see here it added in code to add segments of silence and sound. So now we can try running our test. And bingo, all of our tests pass. So this just brings up the important point that sometimes you need to step in. You're still talking to what's basically a bipolar entity, one that's really super smart, but is a 3-year-old on the other side that doesn't know how to solve problems yet, right? It doesn't know how to think about, am I creating the right test environment to run the test. So that's when you need to step in. Otherwise, you can end up going deep down into these rabbit holes. So always be thinking, if my test is broken and it seems like it's continuously just giving me another broken test, think about where you can step in and help. So now we have a nice application that can take a long input audio file and split it up to into individual songs. The last thing we probably want to do is just have it, hey, I don't need all this output. So let's just ask it to clean that up and hope that we don't break anything. So let's tell ChatGPT, the tests are now successful. Can you remove the debugging from the test so the only output is related to the tests? All right, so let's get what we hope is our finalized code. Bingo, bango. We're good. So that's a full application written just using ChatGPT and a little bit of common knowledge that isn't yet available in ChatGPT.